I was kind of thinking that I might read the zero gravity sex scene. It's never been read before, and it's really embarrassing. But this room is called the Makeout Room. So I thought maybe I'd give it a shot. This is gonna be really hard. There are some details that you should know about interplanetary kissing. Shaving, as I've indicated, is made very difficult by the low-gravity water problem and the recirculation of capsule resources. We just don't shave often. It's kind of like Williamsburg, Brooklyn up there. And Jim hadn't shaved in the last day or two. He was kind of scratchy and kind of, well, musky, which I couldn't fail to notice because this was a stick a fork in me because I'm fully cooked sort of kiss. We were holding each other's heads. It was a death grip. And we didn't care if we were not exactly shaved, or if the full expression of masculinity entailed the sandpapering of faces. We were devouring. This was interplanetary disinhibitory devouring. And I could hear him as if over an intercom, whispering and moaning. It was a low moan, a moan that I recognized, namely the moan of months without being touched by another human being. Likely you could hear this moaning coming from the beds of all the astronauts on the mission, even the beds of astronauts whom you did not favor with esteem. You felt great sorrow and sympathy for the fact of these astronauts being untouched, and as the weeks went by, you did feel as though you might touch them, the others, just because it was ridiculous. The drought of human affection was ridiculous, and so this moment was about the incredible gratitude of that drought coming to an end. Jim's eyes were bloodshot, and his hair was a mess, but that didn't stop me from wanting Jim Rose. I wanted Jim Rose, the pilot of our ship, and I wanted to kiss him some more, and I wanted to be kissed some more by Jim Rose, enough so that I didn't care if Jose heard. Apparently I have some skills that I never knew I possessed. Well, maybe skill is not the right word. Maybe it's more like an acumen. My particular acumen was that I could verify immediately the arousal of Jim Rose, my interplanetary fuck buddy. Jim Rose was rather stunning in one of the lightweight garments that we wear when we sleep here on the Excelsior, sort of a baby blue union suit kind of thing. Anyone would admit that he was stunning, but I wanted more, and I could already see more. I could see that underneath his baby blue union suit, Jim Rose was fully aroused by the stolen kisses, the interplanetary kisses. He was a mighty satyr. He was an epic from the classical era of forbidden kisses, the grunting, heaving, moaning, masculine kisses that we exchanged on board the Excelsior. Before we could proceed, I pointed at the cough button, and Jim whispered huskily that he'd already got it, meaning he wanted me, he wanted me. He was thinking about me before he arrived at my bedside. He was thinking about it maybe for days, and perhaps I was thinking about it too, and just not doing a very good job admitting it to myself. But seeing that Jim was, according to the argot of connoisseurs, rock hard, played havoc with my self-deception. Jim was rock hard, and by the standards of the Mars mission, he was, dare I even say it, rather large. He unstrapped me gently from my bed, and I began unfastening pieces of his capsule pajamas. We disrobed each other, that is, and for now we were thankful. This is perhaps the one time that we were thankful that NASA had not undertaken the considerable expense of adding a centrifugal device that would have enabled low gravity in the capsules of the mission. Because once I was unstrapped from bed, we were free to wrestle with each other in the capsule, drifting around, colliding with multi-billion-dollar computer systems, like the one that monitors life support, likewise the kitchen gear. And then we were up at the ceiling, and we were French kissing, and I had never quite realized before how that tongue-sucking business was really aphrodisiacal. Soon we were less than partially clad, Captain Jim Rose and Colonel Jed Richards, and we were warriors of space. And everything about us was lean and hard and murderous. And I had never before seen how glorious it is, the perfect beauty of ambition and self-assurance that is being male. And all I wanted to do in that moment, yes, was to have his staff in my mouth. At least that was my first thought, and my second one dealt with my uncertainty about the circumcision issue. Because I had never really spent any time with a cock that was uncircumcised. And if Jim's space arm, as I had begun to call the thing in my head, was uncircumcised, it was going to require some additional effort on my part. I recognize that there are certain tree-hugging types, free love advocates, children of that long ago and historically debunked period known as the Summer of Love, who believe that this age-old variety of genital mutilation is somehow problematic. But I figured that if I was circumcised, everyone was circumcised. And these thoughts were racing around in me. Would I even know what to do with it? The space arm, if it were uncircumcised? Would I know what to do with it at all? And there were other questions that you would have if you were a man-love neophyte. Would his body be like my body? How hirsute would it be? And yet my inclinations were outpacing my philosophical and psychological quandaries, because I was drifting between his legs, happily so. Before I could even answer these questions, I had the space arm before me. I spit in my hand, except that was not such a superlative idea, because as with most liquids in the capsule, my saliva sort of went spraying around in little balls. Well, that's going to be complicated, I muttered, as I tried to catch some of the spit, with which I then began servicing Jim Rose. The circumcision issue was no issue at all. I just wanted him. And I wanted him however he was, which happened to be unsheathed. according to the Judeo-Christian tradition. Much more fascinating to me was the pumping leg motion and the mild muscular contractions that I was able to bring about in gym, despite the fact that this was the first time in, well, 30 years that I'd been in the amorous presence of another male. Of course, I'd snuck the odd peek at my daughter's sex education textbooks, and I know that there are particular response curves to masculine sexuality. Muscular contraction is part of it, as well as contraction of the sphincter. My observations indicated that Captain Jim Rose was in the early phase of sexual release with me, Jed Richards, and that meant he was probably experiencing desire for me and feelings of warmth and esteem for my person. Because I was feeling the same way, because I was not feeling lonely and doomed for perhaps the first time in the mission, I knew that it was therefore time to go a little further. I was imagining that I would, in fact, put the space arm in my mouth. Jed, you're just like the co-eds I used to butt fuck back at the state school, he said. On any other day, I think it's fair to say that this would not have been a romantic remark. Not of the sort that I was accustomed to. Butt fuck, it's such an awful word when you think about it. It's amazing that anyone would come to love a word so guttural and so unpleasant. But as Jim began huffing and puffing from my exertions, I recognized that something had truly shifted in me, because now the word butt fuck made the sinews in my groin glut with corpuscular activity. I had to have the space arm. It was like some alien life form that had to be mine. Jim, I'm no co-ed. I'm no little girl in a French maid's outfit. But I would be if you wanted me to be. I would be whatever you want me to be. We whispered these enticements. A little hyperbole was no problem. I wanted to say all the words that needed to be said as I drifted down below him, and the space arm was orbitally injected ever deeper into my mouth and toward my throat. The space arm was behaving like a nasty little Orion-class rocket, moving recklessly around in the atmosphere of my wet, spittle-filled mouth and lips. I gagged a little. I tried to say something, but my mouth was full. I could say nothing. I cupped the rest of his bounteous tackle. Should I really go on with this? I swear the orgasm is coming soon. He held the back of my head. Jim said, "Do you think it's just the sickness?" I tried to say, "Do you mean space panic?" I wasn't sure if I was entirely understood. Jim sighed a sigh of romantic anomie, and then he nodded, "Yes, space panic." I pulled him out and looked up, licking the dainty walnuts of his testes. I agree with you. It's not my kind of sport. Or at least it was not my kind of sport on Earth, Jim. But Jim, we aren't on Earth anymore. Yeah. Maybe where we're going, this is the norm. Maybe Mars is the planet where the love between men is not only accepted, but is a hallowed and sacred thing. Oh, yeah. Who are we? Are we now Earthlings? Or are we now the forerunners of a brave new class? Men who are not afraid to love and men who are not afraid of love and power among themselves. And with that, I introduced a forefinger into his tight, imperturbable anus, and he moaned in a way that revealed some of the more brute varieties of wildlife. "More," he said. "More what?" "More of you." More of me, the balding, formerly paunchy, but now frequently hungry, blue-eyed and impish guy with the vanishing muscle mass? The space arm said yes. The space arm was rich in veins and purpley sections, and the head of it resembled a poisonous mushroom of some kind, perhaps the fly amanita, which I was always told to avoid as a youngster. The space arm was cruel and foul, for example, in the profusion of pubic hairs that I kept finding stuck in the roof of my mouth. But I recognized, yes, that cruelty was a fair and beautiful thing, and I wanted it. There were no lengths to which I would not go, nothing I would not do. I was the first ever interplanetary space slut. Or the first, at any rate, to enter the literature. "Wait," I said. He looked stricken, as though I were going to draw a permanent halt to our explorations, but I had no such intention. Petrolatum was an important product on the Excelsior because our skin was patchy and flaky for lack of moisture in the pressurized, recirculated air of the cabin. There was even an official supplier of petrolatum to the Mars mission, and as with other licensing firms, I'm discouraged from naming it, though you'll find its banner advertising throughout the site. Nor am I allowed to remark that the official sponsor of petrolatum to the Mars mission was about to serve as the lubricant for the Uranian delights. I just want to skip to the cum shot, you guys. Really? Alright. By my bed on the little overhead shelf where my personal effects were velcroed down was a precious tube of the stuff. I brandished it as if I already knew how these props of the trade became fetish objects in their own right. Jim was stroking his space arm while he waited for me and making some more noises that sounded like a bull elephant in the midst of toppling banyan trees. And this was both deeply shameful and not at all feminine, and about one of the most exciting things I had ever heard. The cry of the heron lifting off from the swamps, that prehistoric and laughable squawk, didn't hold a candle to Jim Rose in the moment of ecstatic celebration. I urged him to apply the petrolatum if possible without getting any loose in the cabin. The place was already like the inside of an immemorial XXX film emporium where the patrons were all lacquered with their own juices. Jim was only too happy to oblige. "How do we do it?" he asked. "Well, how complicated can it be?" I said. "They were doing it at ages past, well before the combustion engine." He reached down and took a hold of me, as though he had neglected my own little re-entry hose coupling. "Are you gonna do me too? Is that what you want, you southern prince? I've been thinking about it for days. You first. Which? In me." And I turned so that I was facing the reinforced windscreen of the capsule, and beyond the windscreen in the foreground of the great mass known as the Milky Way was our imminent destination, the Red Planet. Like the hide of a great mother to whom we were soon going to apply ourselves for nourishment. And as I took note of the massed dry ice of the North Pole, I could feel the space arm hungering at the opening of me, and then the space arm plunging in. I would like to say kids, but this is nothing but a pleasant sensation. And that when you love someone enough, it's a consensual and loving act. But if I'm being honest, This is not how I experienced it. There was a sharp intake of breath, as though I were somehow responsible for inspiring all the oxygen in the capsule. And then there was a sharp stabbing sensation, sort of how I imagine it must feel to have your innards impaled on a pike. And this coincided with Jim driving in harder and deeper till I was sure he was going to stir up that evening's ham somewhere up in my stomach. I'm afraid I just couldn't get the hang of it the first time. They just don't tell you about that in all the pornographic literature. For a second, therefore, I needed him to pull the space arm out while I got myself better situated. After all, we were drifting around. And the only thing stabilizing us was Jim hanging onto my hips. And that made it hard for me to feel like much but his pincushion, his voodoo doll. After one last gigantic thrust, in fact, we went careening across the capsule and smacked our heads on the hatch to the upper airlock. That was going to result in concussion. Jim was all overheated, however, and he didn't want to stop, as men never want to stop, I suppose, as I myself on many an occasion did not want to stop. But by grabbing onto a maintenance step by the hatch coupling, I did manage to unimpale myself briefly. Unfortunately, Jim Rose was at the segment of the curve of masculine desire known as the point of no return. And he could not stop. And he whimpered like a kicked mutt. And from out of the space arm issued a torrent of celestial blobs. Given what I've already explained to you kids, it would have been a lot better from virtually every point of view if this spunk had been fired into some sort of receptacle, like my mouth or some other opening. Because now Jim's issue was scattering in many directions at once, toward all the walls of the capsule, according to the very physical properties of explosions. This was like some big bang of interplanetary sex. "My God in the heavens," Jim said, the last few drops expelling themselves from his cock, now withering. "Oh man, we gotta do something about this. Will you help me?" Immediately he set about rappelling down the side of the capsule, trying vainly to capture droplets of jism. But in order to put them where exactly? Kids, it was like trying to keep still the little marbles of mercury. "Just eat it," I said, with the weariness of the just fucked. "Eat it? Put it in your mouth, for God's sakes," I said. And then the two of us breaststroked around the capsule, attempting to swallow down the afterglow of our profane and inadvisable entanglement. Thanks.
Give it up one more time for Rick Moody.